These two guys have Minnesota sports flowing in their veins. Mackey and Judd on Score North and ScoreNorth.com.
That's right. If you're consuming this on the Friday that it is recorded here, you can help us break the Score North YouTube channel late tonight. You know, once you're done with your late night dinner, your cocktails, whatever it is, maybe you're coming back from Target Center or the XL Energy Center, we are going to be live simultaneously with two different shows, recapping two different Game 3s, Judd's Hockey Show and Flagrant Howls, live on the Score North YouTube channel tonight. So swing by. I think we're the only platform doing that. I don't think anyone else is doing, for certainly one, not two post-game shows. So come check us out, Score North YouTube channel. Click subscribe, click the like button, help us spread the word. These therapy sessions have been very helpful, I think, to a lot of people, especially for the Timberwolves. A lot to unpack there.
Let's see who starts in goal tonight, too, because there could be a major therapy session going on.
Wait, there's a question about who starts in goal?
There shouldn't be, but there shouldn't have been for Game 2 either, Phil. So let's wait and see, okay? The therapist can't determine what happens. The therapist can only determine the form of therapy once we see what happens.
Okay. There should not be a question about who starts in goal. I'm not trying to lash out at you, but what are we? I was going to say, what are we doing here?
I'm just a messenger.
Okay. Well, welcome into the show. This is Feedback Friday, where we take all of your questions and comments and concerns, critiques from the week. We try to get to as many as we can. And this is going to be a big, giant batch of Vikings feedback here on this Friday. So let's start with Derek Vetter. And I think that the theme here is sort of how much will Kwesi shake things up early on the feedback here. Derek says, this is more of a rant than a question. Big fan of the show. I've been watching now for just under 2 years. I came across you guys at Score North during the live draft episodes in 2021. I think you guys filled a real need in the Vikings fan community, a realistic critique of the Vikings, a team that has never won a Super Bowl but still has a large chunk of fans clamoring for the status quo. I honestly think if I hadn't found your show, I may have checked out on Vikings football a couple years ago. The team was stale. Kirk got a fresh new extension again, even though he had zero real success. They brought back guys on contracts that were obviously crippling just so they could keep scraping by and winning like 9 games. It just flat out wasn't fun to watch anymore. It was like watching the same movie over and over again that's good, not great, and the main character dies in a gruesome, almost disgusting fashion at the end, which is pretty much every Viking season. It's nice to know other fans out there can see the bigger picture. They can see the perpetual hell we've been in for 5 going on 6 years. I'm rambling a bit, but how on earth can some people watch this team fail year after year and not want wholesale change? What are your thoughts here as the sports therapist for Derek? And then how much do you think Kwesi will shake the tree here in terms of wholesale change? We've already seen some wholesale change.
Yep. Well, one, Derek, I'm glad that we did not lose you because it sounds like we came very close. I'm glad that you persisted. I'm glad that you found us, and I'm glad that we can help. That's why we are here. So I think his first point is very interesting, too. So before we get to Kwesi, Derek is 1,000% right. In retrospect, 21 was a sneaky, really tough year as far as just running it back again. Like, ideally now, in retrospect, after 20, you blow out Rick and Mike, right? And I believe that they both gotten contract extensions after 19, which is probably largely why they didn't get blown out. The pandemic obviously affected things. But I just remember going back to training camp in 21, where it was, I didn't know how bad, turns out it was terrible, but it was very clear that Rick and Mike weren't talking, that things had fallen apart. If you guys recalled when Jeff Gladney was cut and Mike was talking about, well, I can't talk, or I can't talk about him in specific. And I asked Mike, I said, yeah, but what about first round draft picks? Like, when you lose these guys, and he's like, well, especially with the way that Rick covets them, or it just was, there was so much animosity. Like, Mike hated Kirk. Rick and Mike didn't get along. It was stale. It had run its course. And so I could see as a Vikings fan how that became very taxing. And then I know that they weren't a terrible team, but it sure didn't feel good. And so, yeah, I think now what makes this so exciting is the freshness potentially, right? There's so many unknowns now. We don't know. We don't know. And I think it's why we were sort of disappointed going into 22 because we thought that there might be changes. There really weren't, but now there are. And so if you're a Vikings fan and you're not loyal just to certain players, like you're a Vikings fan, I think it's refreshing now. Like, that's a very good point. It doesn't feel, if among other things, there's 100% O'Connell probably deserves a ton of credit for this. It doesn't feel stale, right?
Yes, I agree. I think it was a big step, and it's also just inevitable. When you get players who are in their 30s, you're going to say goodbye to them. So I don't think the Vikings deserve a ton of credit necessarily for saying goodbye to Eric Kendricks and Adam Thielen. It's just part of the evolution of rosters in the NFL. But because they finally took the big step of saying goodbye to two longtime, well-respected, but aging players, it's the first time in a while where it actually feels like, well, I mean, besides, changing out the GM and the coach, that there are wholesale roster changes on the horizon. And it still feels like we're just getting started here, even this offseason. I wouldn't be shocked if Danielle Hunter and or Kirk Cousins were both off the roster by week 1. I think anything's possible. They still have to make cap moves. Like they don't have enough money to sign their draft picks right now. And they could easily just, do a Danielle or a Brian O'Neill restructure. There's ways they can do it, but
right.
Dalvin Cook, Danielle Hunter, Kirk Cousins, these longtime pillars of the franchise are all just kind of twisting in the wind right now. So there's a lot more on the horizon here, and draft night in less than a week is going to be a fork in the road for, all right, do they go aggressive and get their quarterback of the future and then set a chain of events off that says goodbye to Cousins and whatnot? Are they having trouble reaching an extension with Danielle Hunter and they decide let's use him to go get a first or a second round pick? So Kwesi's shaking the tree. Mm-hmm. It took him a year, but he is definitely shaking the tree. JT Maraski says, was a law recently passed that makes it illegal for Minnesota teams to move past the first round of the playoffs? All 4 of the big men's pro teams have had multiple playoff appearances now the last few years, and only the 2019 Vikings have made it out of the first round. But they were then punished for their crime by the 49ers. And after last night, the Wild and Timberwolves look quite safe from breaking that law. If the Twins make it this year, we just know another one and out against the Yankees is coming. I wonder if any of our teams will be brave enough to fight the man and get to the second round of the playoffs. I love the show. You guys keep me sane during the day. I work remote and live with my wife and 3 girls, all of whom have zero sports interests. You guys help fill that sports debate hole in my life. It is kind of incredible. When's the last time the Wild made the second round?
2015.
8 years.
Yeah.
Timberwolves, it's been almost 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Twins, it's been
20
years.
Yeah.
Vikings did it in 2019.
Yep.
And 17.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Just
so
got
Vikings,
past the Saints by the hair of their chinny chin chin.
Mm-hmm. The Vikings are doing it once in a while.
But again, this is why his point is why I find it so at times distressing that we settle so much, right? Well, game 2, the Wild, they got to split. It's like our expectations cannot just continually, it feels like every time something bad occurs that we find the antidote to that. Well, the Wild lost again in the first round, but they made the playoffs. It was a fun year, right? Like why are we always looking for the bright side of not getting a championship? Or I shouldn't say
it's a coping mechanism,
Right, but as a sports therapist, it's not a healthy one. We need to expect more. There's nothing wrong with expecting more. There's nothing wrong with when the head coach and potentially GM starts a goaltender who shouldn't start. I got a tweet last night. You got to get past this. This was what they did all season long. Okay? No, I'm not going to get past it. You didn't give yourself the best chance to win. Why would I want to get past that? Why would I not expect? We're literally right here. It's a joke. We're sitting here talking about winning first rounds.
I know. Well, yes, I agree. And I hear the same thing on the on the Timberwolves front, flagrant howls. Like I feel like half the episodes are just me going in on Karl Anthony Towns, deservedly so. But I think it makes people a little uncomfortable sometimes too. Like Minnesotans, we try to avoid conflict. And so I can sense, and plus I just feel like what more is there to say at this point? He just continuously puts up clunkers.
Right.
But I don't know. Are we supposed to just kind of let it happen as a fan base and not make noise about it? Yeah. Because I think fans have a huge influence over organizational decisions? Not necessarily, nor do I think they should. I don't think fans should be running an organization with just our emotional whims and thoughts and takes. But I think, for instance, Karl Anthony Towns should know that, dude, there should be a little pressure here to be better, to live up to the contract. So I go back and forth. I don't want to just sit here and complain day after day after day and just be a dark cloud on this.
Because you're a lone wolf, too. That's the problem. There's power, there's strength in numbers, right? If Karl Anthony Towns was pulling the crap that he pulls here in New York or Boston, it wouldn't be Phil ripping him and the Boston Globe and Herald saying, "Oh no, nothing's wrong." So that's the problem. Is we are actually, and this is where I think the Purple Daily and this show, our families have issues. We are made to feel guilty. And we are made to feel like we're lone wolves because of the criticism. Like, what? We're going to make... I mean, think about this. The default position in this town is, we're not going to make a difference. That's the default position. And I'm going to tell you right now, if the media went all in on Towns, it might not change things, but there would be way more accountability.
Do you think he would play better more often in big games if the media and fans sort of assembled and went after him more collectively as opposed to just me on a podcast or
100%. Well, no, I don't know that, but here's what I think. I think that, keeping in mind again, we are 8 years in. I was 45 when he was drafted.
For Towns, right?
Towns,
okay.
Right. But I'm saying Towns as the poster child for this discussion. So we're 8 years in. That's a long time in sports. That's dog years. That's an eternity. And nobody's hand, the Wolves, Towns's, has never been forced by any outside influence other than potentially TNT, which is a non-factor. He hears that. But what I'm saying is, imagine if Towns, rightfully so, was getting ripped up and down right now. It might not force Tim Connolly to make a move, but it would force some action fairly quickly. He'd be miserable. Towns would be. Conley, I mean... Tim Connolly has gotten away, you guys, with making one of the most controversial trades in this town ever. A trade that might go down, for all we know, is the worst trade. And all we say is, well, he's not talking.
Yeah, how many times has he done interviews?
Not much.
Even?
But the point is, okay, he's not talking. Guess what? You have the right to talk for him. You have the right to talk about what he did. You have the right, if you have a column in this town, to absolutely write about him as much as you want. Like this whole thing of us passively aggressively going about our day. What am I going to have for dinner? Oh, I'm going to watch the Wolves game. Oh, the Wolves sucked again. That's okay.
I'm going to have a big spoonful of ass kicking at the hands of the Nuggets for dinner. It's going to be great.
Do I think that on a daily basis the fans and media are going to make teams make changes? No, absolutely not. But do I think that just backing off on everything and being like, well, if Cat, think about this for a second. It's a big deal that Cat talks on a regular basis.
He played like crap, but at least he faced the media after the game, right? He doesn't.
But process that for a second.
There's a lot to unpack here, and now we've kind of gone down a Wolves path that I wasn't expecting. But it drives me nuts when we give credit to athletes for doing their job. When you have for instance, Kirk Cousins or Karl Anthony Towns or Byron Buxton, right? Well, Byron Buxton played in 7 straight games or something. It's like,
yes,
certain things should not be celebrated. I think there's a good chance Towns comes out in game 3, and people might listen to this after he does or doesn't do this, but he could come out and explode for 28 points, 15 rebounds, 3 assists. And it's going to be a celebration of, and that's great. But when you are 8 years in your prime, supermax player, face of the franchise, putting up 25 and 15 and hitting threes should be the base level playoff performance for you. But we tend to, and the same for Kirk, oh, look at Kirk. He's playing well in the fourth quarter. It's like, well, yeah, that's literally what he's getting paid to do. I'm not saying you can't praise them, but sometimes we go so over the top praising people for doing what they're supposed to do and then shielding them from criticism when they regularly don't do what they're supposed to do.
And not starting Gustafson in game 2 is not just, Dean himself said it. That's the way they've always done it. That's a lazy ass excuse, okay? Like, you have a chance to win a playoff game or at least hold the game close. Because I'm going to tell you right now, Gustafson in game 2 does not give up 7 goals. And instead, it's just like, Dean said this. Our acceptance of the excuses that we get and our ability, and I think it's because of, again, our passive aggressive nature, but our ability to set a bare floor of, well, at least he talked, is not how this should work.
Yeah.
I think too, just on the sports fan side of things, of entering a playoff series and whatnot, like the Wild have now been to 3 straight playoff first round series. Okay, so this is the 3rd straight year they're entering a best of 7 series in the first round, and in a series where, in my opinion, they have a chance to win. They had a chance to win in Vegas. Wild fans were jumping for joy when they got Vegas 2 years ago, because the Wild have historically really beat up on the Vegas Golden Knights in the regular season. He lost in 7 games. Last year, the Wild get the Blues in a home ice. This is only the 2nd time. The Wild have been in the playoffs a ton, right? This is only the 2nd or 3rd time that the Wild get home ice in a playoff series. Oh, this will be great. You lost in 6. Going into game 1 this week against the Stars to begin the week, I don't know why this is, but game 1 at least for a playoff series in hockey, and I love hockey, the Wild have been there so much, it doesn't amp me up. I don't get the nerves. I don't get the excitement because they've literally been in the first round for half their existence.
Now you've developed a tolerance now. The first 2 drinks don't give you a buzz now, dude.
No, they don't. I need 4. I need 5, 6. Where the Twins, I think it's so pent up. They haven't even won a playoff game where I am on pins and needles and I'm pinching the entire time because I'm so upset and nervous of what's going to happen. And the last one with the Vikings, it's just they had a wild card round this year. All right, we get playoff football, and playoff football is great, right? Especially when your team's in it. There was an excitement, there was a fresh breath air and whatnot. But now it's so weird how I'm just I'm desensitized basically to Minnesota Wild playoff games.
It is quite incredible. Actually, you know what? This is a good segue here. Min Choi chimes in here via the Score North app on this Feedback Friday. And he says, I love the show because you guys demand championships, call out the ones who are satisfied with mediocrity. But sometimes it feels like, just to interject here, it's kind of a straw man. Yes, we tend to, I don't know, be a little more edgy in that we criticize more often and we sort of lash out through these platforms. But Min Choi says, I love the show because you guys demand championships, call out the ones who are satisfied with mediocrity. Here is where being in love with mediocrity has gotten Minnesota sports from a probabilistic point of view. He's an analytics guy, okay? Since the Twins won a championship in 1991, over 30 years ago, there are around 30 teams in each of the major 4 men's leagues. That means we should realistically expect a championship every 30 years from each team, mathematically. It's like your turn.
Right.
The odds of just reaching, not even winning a championship game or series in a 30-team league is 1 in 15. So keeping this simple, he does a bunch of math here. I'm going to trust his math. There's a 99.3% chance that any given city or state with 4 major teams should expect a championship series or game in a 3-decade period. The odds of not winning a single championship is less than 2% over a 30-year period when you have 4 teams in the 4 leagues. If this is not the sign of a historically bad losing culture in this state, then what is? No more fear, no more mediocrity. Thank you for your service in trying to change this state. Dude, it is. I almost feel like it's not recognized or talked about enough when we talk about cities with droughts, right? Well, Buffalo or whatever. Well, Buffalo has 2 teams. Yeah. We have 4 teams.
Yes.
30 years. And there was a little gap there. There was like a 7-year gap with the Wild and North Stars transition. But it's mathematically, I'll trust this math, that it's almost impossible to not have been to a championship series or game And it's also almost impossible to not have won something in those 30 years when you have 4 teams taking a crack at it every year.
Well, and let's examine this too. So, like, I feel like the Vikings, for as much pain as they cause, are the one sort of normal team that can't get a title because they go to playoffs. They've had some great years. They're consistently good, okay? But let's delve down. Let's dig down here with the 3 teams left. The Wolves. The Wolves were an expansion team in 1989-90. They have now been here longer than the North Stars were. And they have one run of playoffs, which ended with all first round losses until they got to the conference finals. But for the most part, they have been just an abysmal disaster, one of the worst teams in pro sports. The Wild signed 2 of, probably had one of the biggest days, if not the biggest day ever in NHL free agency history, right? You signed 2 of the biggest names. You packaged them up. You basically said what the Vikings said in 18, which is, okay, this is just championship or bust. The owner said that essentially. And not only are both guys now gone, bought out, paid to go away in a divorce, but you haven't been past the first round in a sport that's arbitrary in a lot of ways since 2015. And the Twins might trump everybody with a losing streak in North America that will never be broken.
Yeah. It's and it's under the radar nationally. It really is, because it's not, it's kind of a flyover market, but it is pretty incredible. I got a couple more for you guys here. This next one from Brian North is presented by our friends over at Underdog Fantasy. If you're looking to, it's already an exciting sports weekend. If you're looking to make it even more exciting, our friends at Underdog have you covered, Declan.
Especially, too, if you want to, when you're watching the Wild and Wolves tonight, you can do a little mixed sport entry, okay? You can do a little mixed sport. Why don't you take a Minnesota Timberwolves prop, Anthony Edwards, 25.5, over under. I'd ride the over. You always ride the over. Always go up on the over, right? What about when Philip Gustafson's hopefully named the starter here in a couple hours? Why don't you take the over on saves for Philip Gustafson? Because the Stars like to shoot a lot. You can do a bunch of mixed sports entries there. PGA Tour is going on this weekend. Plenty of great stuff at Underdog Fantasy. First-time users get a $100 bonus with promo code SCORE, SKOR, when they sign up. Go download the Underdog Fantasy app.
Thanks to Dennis Kirk also for supporting us here at Score North. It's been a long winter. Now, I saw in outstate Minnesota, like Wilmer, people were like snowblowing yesterday.
This is ridiculous.
It's one of the worst historical snow winter seasons in Minnesota history, but riding season is just around the corner now. Make sure your motorcycle is ready with Dennis Kirk. You'll find what you need at DennisKirk.com so you can ride more and wait less. Over 180,000 parts and accessories in stock, clothing and helmets as well. Shipping is free for orders over $89. If you order by 8 p.m., they ship the same day. Everything you need for your ride at DennisKirk.com. From Brian North, he says, longtime listener going back to the 1500 ESPN radio days. First, I want to say thank you guys for all the great content. Enjoy how far you guys have come from a 4-hour radio show to now doing a fantastic all-around podcast. Thank you, Brian. Appreciate that.
So are we.
Adaptable. I want to write in today and comment on the running back discourse. I feel like we've gone so far in the other direction that it's insane to me. And people are really saying they wouldn't want Bijan Robinson in the first round if he's available. To me, this is crazy talk. If we didn't use the words running back and I just said, hey, would you like a great football player on your team who can catch the ball? He's a threat to score on every play. He can pick up blitzers in the backfield, all for like $3, $5, $7 million a year for the next 5 years. Pretty sure everyone would sign up for that guy. Can we try and not overthink this too much?
All good points. Unfortunately, I think the pendulum has swung so much, it's not swinging back. Now, this might be a unique case, and it just takes one team, for instance, in the top 15 to say, screw it, we'll take him. But I mean, I think when you look at how teams look at players now and most importantly, positions, right? I don't know until running backs get to change their position name to, like he said, football player. I don't know that the pendulum is going to swing back, but with this kid, perhaps there's a team in the top, 12 that take him.
Well, I think one thing I would say is this is not to minimize the talent of Bijan Robinson, because I'm on the record saying, hey, if he's still there in the 20s, I'm depending on how the draft board plays out, I'm considering him, especially if you're saying goodbye to Dalvin Cook.
Sure.
But if you're a running back and most of your work comes behind an offensive lineman, that like most of your touches and the success of you as a player, regardless of your talent, is predicated on what's happening in front of you, as opposed to a wide receiver. And now the offensive line and the quarterback are integral to a wide receiver success too. Everyone has to play off each other. But a wide receiver is out there trying to beat a cornerback on a route, speed, agility, whatever it is. A running back is really at the mercy of blocking up front first and foremost. So that's just like, that's why you can put sort of a backup caliber running back in. You can go from Dalvin Cook to Alex Madison, and it maybe goes from like, 4.5 yards a carry to 4 yards a carry or something. It's not a huge difference. But if you went from Justin Jefferson for a full season down to, who's the fifth round receiver from Michigan State, for instance, right?
Naylor.
Jalen Naylor.
Yeah.
He ain't going for 1,800 yards and 9 touchdowns.
Right.
So there's just a bigger drop off at some of the other skill positions. Now, if you can use Bijan Robinson in the passing game and he can catch 60 passes and do all these other things, but that's why running backs are just so their success is so predicated on what's happening in front of them. So I get it. But Dex, would you take Bijan Robinson? What's your stance on him?
I think he looks damn good. When Daniel Jeremiah says he's the second best player on his big board, and look, everyone has different evaluations of draft prospects, and I have been on the record numerous times saying I find the mock draft community like the most fascinating industry in all of sports. I just truly think it's incredible. But when a guy like Daniel Jeremiah, who's a very plugged-in scout and has worked for front office teams, says that, and looking just at his production, just as someone who hasn't watched a lot of Texas football, I would take a chance on a running back like that. That could be a game-changing running back. So, yeah, I'd be in on it.
Luke Konowalski chimes in and says, "Hey, guys, loved your best draft picks since 2006 episode. Judd put together a pecking order on Purple Daily this week of the best Vikings draft picks in each round since 2006 when he started covering the team. Could you guys do the worst picks of each round? I'd love to see that list. It would be hilarious. Thanks for the laughs." Well, old Macadac has put together that list.
Nice.
What did you do?
Through 7 rounds? Because
I didn't include the 6th
I'm
and
like,
7th.
I can't do 7th round picks. They all, for the most part, suck.
I went 5 rounds because once you get to the 6th or 7th round, it's mostly just whiffs. There's nothing.
Well, not according to Rick, it wasn't. According to Rick, those were precious picks. Give me 5 more of them in each round. If
you look and see, if you draft 27th round picks and one pans out, this is why I think Kwesi knows this. I think he's much more interested in 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th round picks. If he can package picks and move back into the 5th round or something. So anyhow, all right, here's mine. Just kind of doing 5 minutes of research before the show here today. So I went since 2006. So I did the same parameters as Judd. Okay. The worst picks by the Vikings by a round. We'll start with the 1st round, and it's between 2 players, I think. I chose Christian Ponder. Well, actually, it's between 3 players because you can make a case for Troy Williamson or Laquan Treadwell. Mm-hmm. But I went Christian Ponder just because he's a quarterback, the magnitude of the position and the failure, and I think the fact, too, that he was just out of the league after his rookie contract was over. He wasn't even valuable enough to be a backup in his early 30s. He was just out of the league.
The incredible thing about Troy, though, is he was the 7th overall pick. Mm-hmm. Like Treadwell was in the 20s, right?
Yeah.
And Ponder was like 12th, so that's really, really bad. I do agree with your assessment there, but you took a guy that couldn't catch a football 7th overall. And then in the same draft at 18, you took Erasmus James, who just turned out to hate football.
Yeah, that was a rough draft, man. Really rough draft.
Oh, that entire draft is awful.
And the optics, too. It's not Troy Williamson's fault that he was coming in to replace Randy Moss. Like, everything else was his fault, not being able to catch passes. Right. But the optics of, okay, here's the guy that's going to replace Randy Moss, and he's the worst receiver in Vikings history, right? 2nd round, I chose Chris Cook, the 1st round cornerback. That dude played like 5 years in the NFL, 0 interceptions. As a 2nd round cornerback, he did not pick a pass off in the NFL.
Yep. I believe, wasn't there a game, and this was like early Twitter days, and he did, like, credit to him. he did put Megatron in check for a game. And by Megatron in check, I mean he had like 4 catches for 65, 70 yards. And we all kind of, we found a new stud cornerback in Chris Cook. No, it didn't work out for him.
And if I'm not mistaken, Chris Cook was one of those drafts where the Vikings didn't have a first-round pick, and so he was a second-round pick, but he was their first pick in the draft. Yeah, he was, God, was he not good.
Yeah, that was bad news. Honorable mention, Toby Gerhart, but Gerhart gave you at least some backup reps as a running back.
Yeah.
Cook was terrible. Okay, third round, this is where we get into, like, third, fourth, fifth rounds. It's mostly bad players. I'm going to highlight some of the worst ones.
Okay.
I think Kellen Mond is the worst third-round pick the Vikings have made since 2006.
Wow.
All of us were very hopeful and optimistic that, okay, some people are saying some good things, but that dude was off the roster before his second season.
Yep. With a coaching staff that knew quarterback play. So they basically said, this guy's so bad, we can't even coach him.
Yep. Off the roster before his second season. But you could say the same thing about Wyatt Davis and Chaz Surratt. That whole, outside of Patrick Jones, that whole third round, abject disaster. So Kellen Mond.
Okay. That's a good one.
Fourth round, a 6'5", 330-pound behemoth that basically was just out of the league in a couple years. Willie Beavers.
Oh, God.
The highest pick in that draft to be cut coming out of camp. Like to cut a fourth round pick, you have to suck.
It's bad, yeah. Because those fourth round picks are supposed to be starters for you if you are doing your job the right way.
That's a swallow your pride one, right? Like, yeah, this guy looks bad, but we can't cut him. How are we going to justify this?
Yeah.
They're like, you are not good.
And then I'm piling on here. I feel bad doing this. He's a gopher, but along the same lines, the Vikings drafted Nate Triplett, a linebacker, in the 5th round about 10 years ago, and he was cut out of training camp. They just flat out cut a 5th round linebacker, and I think he might have played 5 games in the NFL for somebody else. But so Nate Triplett, and then there's 6th and 7th rounders, but most of them are just irrelevant, so it's kind of hard to do that. So those are the worst Vikings draft picks by a round since 2006.
I like that. These guys wouldn't qualify as the worst third round picks, but the trio of cornerbacks, definitely Marcus McCauley, Asher Allen,
Josh Robinson,
who all played.
But this is the thing. They were bad compared to the starting players, but compared to the world of third round picks, those guys at least emerged as starting NFL players, which is why, because people are going to say, well, what about like TJ Clemmings or Drew Samia? Well,
he played,
yeah, those guys were not good players, but they started in the NFL as opposed to some other 3rd, 4th round picks like Willie Beavers that couldn't get out of training camp.
The problem was the Vikings prided themselves on the premise of, cornerbacks, we're going to find them in the 3rd round. And they found this list of guys who played so poorly. And here's the other thing, the Josh Robinson thing, because it's not sexy to talk about, but when they cut Winfield, right? And they moved this poor kid into the slot, which they knew was a tough job. And they basically said, you sort of struggled outside a bit. Like, you might be a player there. We're not sure. Go cover the inside receiver in the slot. Is one of the most baffling decisions. And there's no way Frazier said that. There's no way. Because he was a defensive guy. He's not dumb. Spielman or somebody must have said, he can move inside.
Yeah.
One of the most baffling decisions ever made as far as, what are you thinking?
Yeah. So I will say, looking at these lists again, because we've done this a couple times this week, just looking at drafts since 2006, the Vikings historically have hit some big home runs in the 1st round, but then some equal big time busts. So it's very feast or famine. All right. That is a wrap on this Feedback Friday here in Minnesota Sports with Mackey and Judd. Appreciate you guys hanging out with us. If you're watching on the Score North YouTube channel, please click the subscribe and the like buttons so we can keep spreading the word and growing this Minnesota sports fan /therapy community. And we'll see you over the weekend here for some post-game recaps and some vent lines on Flagrant Howls and Judd's Hockey Show. See ya.